Welcome. We're happy to have you join us here at the Z-Files, where today we will seek to answer the question, what if everything you thought you knew about animal intelligence was wrong? For most of human history, we have drawn a clear line between ourselves and other life on our planet, assuming that the qualities we prize, memory, problem-solving, empathy, even a sense of self, belong exclusively to us. Now we will take a closer look and ponder a scenario where that's not entirely true. Part 1. What we miss when we look away. Over recent decades, scientists working quietly in labs and field stations have been documenting abilities in animals that challenge long-held assumptions. They have found that intelligence appears in forms we never thought to look for, and that the minds of other species may be far richer than we imagined. Consider the honeybee. This small insect, with a brain containing fewer than 1 million neurons compared to our roughly 86 billion, can perform feats that seem almost deliberate in their complexity. When a colony needs to find a new home, scout bees fly out in search of suitable sites. Upon returning, they perform what researchers call the waggle dance, a figure-8 movement that conveys both the direction and distance of a potential nest. Other scouts then visit these sites and return to dance themselves. Over hours or even days, the colony reaches a consensus through this process. The dances for the best sites grow more vigorous, while dances for poor sites fade away. Eventually, the swarm lifts off and flies to the location that received the most support. This is not a dictate from a queen. It is a collective decision, arrived at through communication and evaluation. Researchers have found that bee colonies choose the best available site with remarkable consistency, even when several options exist. This finding matters because it suggests that decision-making, long thought to require large brains and complex cognition, can emerge from relatively simple interactions. The bees are not voting in a human sense, but they are processing information, comparing options, and arriving at a group choice. The mechanism is distributed across many individuals, yet the outcome is coherent and often optimal. Studies of these swarms have influenced fields as diverse as robotics and organizational behavior, where scientists look to bees as models for decentralized problem-solving. Crows, too, have drawn scientific attention for their unexpected capabilities. In urban environments, American crows and their relatives have learned to recognize individual human faces. Researchers at the University of Washington conducted an experiment in which they captured and banded wild crows while wearing distinctive masks. Later, when people wearing those same masks walked through campus, the crows scolded them with loud, harsh calls, even though the mask wearers were not attempting to capture anyone. The crows remembered. More striking still, crows that had never been captured themselves also scolded the mask wearers, suggesting that they had learned about the threat from other crows. This ability to recognize, remember, and transmit information about specific individuals is a form of social learning. It requires not just memory, but also the capacity to treat certain humans as individuals worth tracking. Why does this matter? Because it hints at a level of cognitive sophistication that goes beyond instinct. The crows are making fine distinctions, storing those distinctions over time, and possibly teaching others. These are capacities we often reserve for species much closer to us in evolutionary terms. Yet here they are, unfolding in the minds of birds. Elephants offer another window into hidden depths. In the wild, elephants have been observed standing vigil over the bodies of dead companions, touching the bones with their trunks and lingering in ways that observers describe as mournful. Some researchers are cautious about attributing human-like grief to elephants, noting that we cannot know their inner states with certainty. But the behaviors are consistent and widespread. Elephants return to the sites where relatives have died, sometimes years later. They examine the bones, particularly the skulls and tusks, with what appears to be intense interest. In some documented cases, family groups have covered the body of a deceased member with branches and dirt, behaviors that suggest a recognition of death as something significant. These observations are difficult to interpret fully, but they challenge the old view that animals live entirely in the present, reacting to immediate stimuli without reflection. Elephants seem to carry their past with them, to recognize absence, and to respond to it in ways that at least parallel our own responses to loss. Whether we call this grief is perhaps less important than the recognition that elephants possess an emotional landscape complex enough to accommodate something like it. The evidence accumulates in small, careful increments. Each study adds a piece to a larger picture, one in which the boundaries between human and animal minds grow less distinct. These creatures are not like us in all ways, but neither are they as unlike us as we once assumed. Their intelligence takes different forms, adapted to different lives, yet it is intelligence nonetheless. We are beginning to see this, slowly, as the quality of our attention improves. Let us turn to another set of examples, where the surprises come not from social behavior, but from individual problem solving. Part 2. Minds beneath the surface. The octopus is a creature of contradictions. It is an invertebrate, a member of the mollusks, more closely related to clams and snails than to any vertebrate. Yet its cognitive abilities rival those of many mammals. An octopus has approximately 500 million neurons, a number comparable to a dog, but unlike a dog, most of these neurons are not located in its brain. Instead, they are distributed throughout its 8 arms. This decentralized nervous system allows each arm to act with a degree of independence, solving problems on its own while the central brain attends to other matters. Researchers have documented octopuses using tools, a behavior once thought to be rare outside of primates and a few bird species. In Indonesia, veined octopuses have been observed collecting coconut shell halves from the seafloor, carrying them awkwardly across open sand, and then assembling them into a protective shelter. The octopuses carry the shells beneath their bodies as they walk on the tips of their arms, a mode of locomotion that looks both ungainly and purposeful. Later, when threatened, they climb inside and pull the shells closed around them. This is not opportunistic use of a nearby object. It is planning. The octopus transports the shells before there is any immediate danger, anticipating a future need. In laboratory settings, octopuses have learned to open jars to obtain food, navigating the threads of a screw-top lid with precision. They have escaped from tanks by climbing out, crossing stretches of dry floor, and entering adjacent tanks, sometimes returning to their original enclosure before morning. One famous account involves an octopus at a New Zealand aquarium that repeatedly left its tank during the night to hunt fish in a neighboring exhibit, then returned before staff arrived. The creature was caught only when researchers set up a video camera. These behaviors require not just intelligence, but also a kind of boldness and curiosity that suggests the octopus is actively exploring its environment, testing boundaries, and solving novel challenges. The octopus also demonstrates learning through observation. In experiments, Octopuses have watched other octopuses solve a task, such as choosing between two different colored balls to receive a food reward, and then succeeded at the task themselves on the first try. This capacity for observational learning is significant because it allows for the transmission of knowledge without direct experience. An octopus can, in effect, learn from the successes and failures of others. What makes the octopus particularly intriguing to scientists is that its intelligence evolved completely independently from vertebrate intelligence. The last common ancestor of octopuses and humans lived more than 500 million years ago and was likely a simple, worm-like creature with minimal neural complexity. Everything the octopus has become, cognitively, it developed on its own evolutionary path. This means that intelligence, at least in some form, is not unique to the vertebrate lineage. It can arise wherever complex behavior offers a survival advantage. The octopus shows us that minds can be built in more than one way. Pigs, by contrast, are mammals, yet they too surprise us with abilities that do not match the stereotypes we hold. Domestic pigs can learn to operate simple video game controls with their snouts, manipulating a joystick to move a cursor toward targets on a screen in exchange for food rewards. In studies conducted at Purdue University, pigs demonstrated an understanding of the connection between their actions and the on-screen effects, a level of comprehension that requires what psychologists call an understanding of agency. The pigs knew that they were causing the cursor to move. They were not simply repeating a trained behavior. They were solving a problem that required them to grasp a symbolic relationship between a physical action and a digital outcome. Pigs also exhibit strong social bonds and sophisticated communication. They use a variety of vocalizations, each with context-specific meanings, and can distinguish between the calls of familiar and unfamiliar individuals. Mothers and piglets maintain contact through a steady exchange of grunts and squeals, with mothers responding differently depending on the urgency conveyed in the piglet's call. Research suggests that pigs can also recognize the emotional states of other pigs based on these vocalizations, showing signs of stress when they hear the distress calls of others. This indicates a capacity for empathy, or at least an awareness of others' emotional experiences. These findings challenge the view that farm animals are simple creatures driven mostly by instinct. Pigs, at least, possess cognitive and emotional lives that warrant serious consideration. The implications extend beyond science into ethics, though that is a conversation for another time. For our purposes here, the pig serves as a reminder that intelligence often hides in plain sight, unnoticed because we have not thought to look. Parrots represent yet another branch of the animal kingdom where intelligence appears in unexpected forms. Perhaps the most famous example is Alex, an African gray parrot who worked with psychologist Irene Pepperberg for 30 years. Alex learned to identify more than 50 objects, 7 colors, and 5 shapes. He could count up to 6 and understood concepts like bigger, smaller, same, and different. When shown a tray of mixed objects and asked, "How many green blocks?" Alex could provide the correct answer, demonstrating that he was not simply memorizing responses but was actually processing the question and analyzing the items in front of him. What made Alex particularly remarkable was his apparent understanding of absence. When asked about an object that was not present, he would answer, "None," a concept that requires recognizing what is missing. He also occasionally made requests, asking to go back to his cage or requesting specific foods, suggesting a degree of intentionality in his communication. On his last day, before he died unexpectedly, Alex said to Pepperberg, "You be good. See you tomorrow. I love you." Whether he understood the full meaning of these words is debated, but the consistency of his language use suggests something more than rote mimicry. These examples, octopuses, pigs, parrots, come from widely separated branches of the animal kingdom, yet they all point toward a common theme. Intelligence is not a single quality bestowed in fixed amounts. It is a collection of abilities that appear in different combinations depending on the needs and history of each species. When we look closely, when we design experiments carefully, we find capacities that were always there, waiting to be recognized. And there is more to discover. Let us continue, gently, into the next layer of evidence. Part 3. The Mirror and the Self. One of the most intriguing questions in the study of animal cognition concerns self-awareness. Do animals recognize themselves as distinct individuals, separate from the world around them? For decades, researchers have used the mirror test as a way to explore this question. The test is simple in concept. A mark is placed on an animal's body in a location the animal cannot see without a mirror. If the animal uses the mirror to investigate the mark, touching it or trying to remove it, this suggests that the animal recognizes the reflection as itself rather than another individual. Very few species pass this test. Great apes, including chimpanzees, bonobos, and orangutans, reliably demonstrate self-recognition. Bottlenose dolphins also pass, using mirrors to inspect marks on their bodies. In one well-documented study, dolphins were marked with temporary ink while they were briefly restrained for health checks. When allowed access to mirrors afterward, they spent significantly more time examining the marked areas, twisting and turning to get a better view. They ignored unmarked areas and showed no interest in the marks before being given access to the mirrors. This pattern strongly suggests that the dolphins understood they were looking at themselves. Elephants have also passed the mirror test, though not all individuals do so. In an experiment conducted at the Bronx Zoo, an Asian elephant named Happy repeatedly used a mirror to touch a white cross painted on her head, a spot she could not see without the reflection. Other elephants in the same study did not show this behavior, which raises questions about individual variation. It is possible that some elephants understand mirrors while others do not, or that the test itself does not capture the full range of self-awareness in elephants. Researchers remain cautious about drawing broad conclusions from a small number of subjects. Magpies, members of the crow family, have also demonstrated behaviors consistent with self-recognition. In experiments, magpies with marks on their throats attempted to remove the marks after seeing themselves in mirrors, but showed no such behavior without mirrors or when the marks were black and thus invisible against their dark feathers. This suggests the magpies understood that the image in the mirror represented their own bodies. The finding is significant because magpies, like all birds, have brains structured very differently from mammalian brains. Yet they appear capable of a cognitive feat that mammals with much larger brains often fail. It is important to note that failing the mirror test does not prove an absence of self-awareness. Dogs, for instance, rarely show interest in their own reflections, but this may simply reflect the fact that dogs rely more on scent than vision. A dog's sense of self might be more olfactory than visual. Similarly, Some researchers argue that the mirror test is culturally biased towards species that use vision as their primary sense and that have a particular kind of curiosity about their own appearance. The test measures one possible expression of self-awareness, but it may not capture others. Still, the species that do pass the test reveal something important. They show that at least some animals possess a concept of self, a mental representation of their own bodies as distinct from the world. This is not a trivial achievement. It requires the brain to integrate sensory information in a way that distinguishes me from not me, and to recognize that a visual image corresponds to one's own physical form. For many years, this capacity was thought to be uniquely human. The evidence now suggests otherwise. Beyond mirrors, researchers have explored self-awareness through other means. Some studies examine whether animals can monitor their own knowledge, a capacity known as metacognition. In these experiments, animals are given tasks of varying difficulty and are allowed to opt out if they feel uncertain. If an animal consistently opts out of difficult trials but attempts easier ones, this suggests the animal has some awareness of its own confidence level. Dolphins, primates, and even rats have shown this ability in controlled settings. When rats were trained to classify sounds as either long or short in duration, they could request a hint on ambiguous trials, effectively saying, "I'm not sure." They used this option more often on the hardest trials, indicating they had some sense of when they were likely to be wrong. These findings suggest that self-awareness exists along a spectrum. It is not simply present or absent, but appears in different degrees and forms across species. Some animals may have a rich sense of self that includes autobiographical memory and future planning. Others may have a more limited self-concept, perhaps just an awareness of their own bodies or their own uncertainty. The full landscape of self-awareness in the animal kingdom remains largely unmapped, but the outlines are beginning to emerge. Memory, too, plays a role in how animals experience themselves and their worlds. Let us turn now to the ways in which animals remember. Part 4. Remembering forward and back. Memory is not just about the past. It is also the foundation for imagining the future, for planning, and for learning from experience. Some animals demonstrate memory abilities that rival or even exceed our own, particularly when those abilities are tied to survival needs. The Clark's nutcracker, a bird native to the mountainous regions of western North America, provides a striking example. Each fall, a single nutcracker collects and caches up to 30,000 pine seeds, hiding them in thousands of different locations across its territory. Months later, during winter and spring when food is scarce, the bird recovers these caches with remarkable accuracy, even when they are buried beneath snow. This feat requires a prodigious spatial memory. The nutcracker must remember not only where each cache is located, but also distinguish between sites it has already emptied and those that still contain seeds. Studies have shown that the birds rely on visual landmarks to navigate, forming cognitive maps of their environment. When researchers move landmarks experimentally, the nutcrackers adjust their search patterns accordingly, indicating that they are not using simple compass directions or random searching. They are recalling specific spatial relationships. The hippocampus, a brain region associated with spatial memory, is proportionally larger in nutcrackers and other cache-storing birds than in related species that do not cache food. This suggests that evolutionary pressures have shaped the brain to support the memory demands of caching. Scrub jays, Another caching species demonstrate even more sophisticated memory abilities. These birds do not just remember where they have hidden food. They also remember what they have hidden and when. In laboratory experiments, scrub jays were allowed to cache two types of food: worms, which they prefer but which decay quickly, and peanuts, which are less preferred but last longer. Later, the jays were given a chance to recover their caches. If only a short time had passed, the jays preferentially recovered the worm caches. But if several days had passed, they ignored the worm caches, apparently knowing the worms would have decayed, and instead recovered the peanuts. This ability to remember what, where, and when is sometimes called episodic-like memory, because it resembles the episodic memory humans use to recall specific personal experiences. Scrub jays also plan for the future. In experiments where birds were fed in one location in the morning but not given food in the evening, they began caching food in the evening location during the morning feeding session, anticipating their future hunger. This is future-oriented behavior. The jay is not responding to a current need, but rather preparing for a need it expects to have later. Such planning was long thought to require a level of mental time travel unique to humans, but scrub jays seem capable of at least a rudimentary version of it. Chimpanzees also demonstrate future planning. In the wild, chimpanzees have been observed selecting stones and carrying them substantial distances to sites where they will later use them to crack nuts. The stones serve no immediate purpose during transport. The chimpanzees are preparing for a future activity. In captivity, a chimpanzee named Santino at a Swedish zoo began stockpiling stones in the morning before the zoo opened to visitors, and then hurled them at visitors later in the day when he became agitated. Eventually, he learned to conceal the stones under piles of hay so that keepers would not remove them. This behavior suggests not only planning, but also an ability to deceive, to conceal intentions from others. Elephants, as mentioned earlier, exhibit behaviors that suggest long-term memory of individuals and places. Elephant families are led by matriarchs, older females who remember the locations of water sources across vast landscapes. During droughts, matriarchs have been observed leading their families to waterholes that the younger elephants have never visited, sometimes traveling dozens of kilometers to sites that have not held water in years but which the matriarch remembers from previous droughts. This knowledge can mean the difference between survival and death for the family group. The matriarch's memory is a collective resource, one that benefits all members of her group. Dolphins also show evidence of long-term social memory. In studies of bottlenose dolphins, individuals remembered the signature whistles of other dolphins they had not encountered for more than 20 years. Each dolphin has a unique whistle, a kind of vocal name, which it uses to identify itself. When researchers played recordings of these signature whistles, dolphins responded more strongly to the whistles of dolphins they had known long ago than to the whistles of strangers, suggesting they retained memories of specific individuals over decades. This capacity for long-term social memory is likely important for maintaining relationships in dolphin societies, which are characterized by fluid associations and temporary alliances. Memory allows animals to navigate complex social and physical landscapes, to learn from the past, and to prepare for the future. It is a thread that connects perception to action, experience to behavior. As we examine memory, we also begin to see the ways in which emotion and cognition intertwine, and that will lead us into the next area of inquiry. Part 5. The emotional lives of others. For much of scientific history, attributing emotions to animals was considered unscientific, a form of anthropomorphism that clouded objective observation. Researchers were trained to describe behavior in neutral terms, avoiding words like fear, joy, or sadness. But as methods have improved and evidence has accumulated, many scientists now accept that at least some animals experience emotional states similar to our own. The question is no longer whether animals have emotions, but rather which emotions they have and how deeply they experience them. Rats, for instance, appear to experience something akin to empathy. In experiments at the University of Chicago, rats were placed in an arena where they could see another rat trapped in a restrainer, a clear tube that confined the trapped rat but caused no physical harm. The free rats consistently worked to open the restrainer and release their cage mates, even when they could have simply eaten chocolate chips available in the arena instead. When given a choice between freeing another rat and keeping chocolate for themselves, many rats chose to free their companion first and then share the chocolate. This behavior was not directed at strangers in the same way. The rats were more motivated to help familiar rats, suggesting that their actions were driven by concern for individuals they knew. These findings challenge the notion that helping behavior in animals is always selfish, driven by expectations of future reciprocity. The rats in these experiments received no obvious benefit from freeing their companions. If anything, releasing another rat meant competition for food. Yet they helped anyway, and they showed signs of distress when they saw a trapped rat. The researchers interpreted this as evidence of empathy, the ability to perceive and respond to another's distress. While we cannot know exactly what the rats felt, their behavior is consistent with an emotional response to another's suffering. Dogs have long been regarded as emotionally attuned to humans, and recent research supports this view with measurable evidence. Studies using functional MRI scans have shown that the reward centers in dogs' brains activate when they see or smell their owners, similar to the brain activity observed when they receive food. This suggests that the presence of their owners is intrinsically rewarding to dogs, not just a signal that food or play is coming. Dogs also show behavioral signs of distress when separated from their owners, including increased heart rate and cortisol levels, hormones associated with stress. More intriguingly, dogs seem capable of reading human emotional expressions. In experiments, dogs respond differently to happy and angry faces, approaching happy faces more readily and showing avoidance behaviors when confronted with angry expressions. They can also follow human gaze and pointing gestures with greater accuracy than chimpanzees in similar tests, a skill that likely evolved through thousands of years of domestication. Dogs have become specialists in understanding humans, attuned to our emotions and intentions in ways that other species are not. Horses also demonstrate emotional sensitivity, both to humans and to other horses. Research has shown that horses can distinguish between happy and angry human facial expressions in photographs, responding with increased heart rates and stress behaviors when shown angry faces. They also recognize individual humans by sight and scent, remembering those who have treated them well or poorly. In social groups, horses form long-term bonds with specific individuals, often standing close together, grooming each other, and showing signs of distress when separated. When a bonded companion dies or is removed from the group, horses may refuse food, call repeatedly, and search for the missing individual. These behaviors suggest that horses form attachments and that the loss of those attachments causes genuine distress. Primates, our closest relatives, show emotional complexity that in many ways mirrors our own. Chimpanzees comfort each other after conflicts, embracing and grooming individuals who have been defeated or injured. Franz de Waal, a primatologist who has studied chimpanzee societies for decades, describes a pattern he calls reconciliation, in which former opponents seek each other out after a fight and engage in behaviors that restore social bonds. The initiated party often extends a hand, and the other accepts, followed by grooming or sitting close together. This is not just instinct. Chimpanzees are more likely to reconcile with individuals they have valuable relationships with, such as kin or long-term allies, suggesting they weigh the social costs of ongoing conflict. Bonobos, closely related to chimpanzees, show even more pronounced empathy and cooperation. In experiments, bonobos willingly share food with strangers and help others reach food without any expectation of reward. They are also highly sensitive to the emotional states of others, often rushing to comfort individuals who are upset or injured. In one observed case, a bonobo led a stunned bird that had flown into a zoo enclosure to safety at the top of a tree, releasing it and watching as it flew away. The behavior served no apparent benefit to the bonobo. It seemed motivated by concern for the bird's welfare. These examples suggest that emotions in animals serve social functions, helping to maintain relationships, coordinate group behavior, and respond to the needs of others. Emotions are not mere byproducts of complex brains. They are tools for navigating social worlds, and they appear wherever social life is sufficiently complex to require them. As we recognize this, we also begin to see that communication in animals is often richer than we assumed. Part 6: Languages without words. Communication is fundamental to social life, and animals have evolved diverse systems for conveying information to one another. Some of these systems are simple, consisting of a few fixed signals. Others are flexible and context-dependent, approaching the complexity of human language in limited but significant ways. While no animal communication system matches the open-ended generativity of human language, several species use signals in ways that convey specific, nuanced information. Vervet monkeys, small primates native to East Africa, use distinct alarm calls for different predators. One call warns of eagles, prompting the monkeys to look up and take cover in bushes. Another warns of leopards, sending the monkeys into trees. A third warns of snakes, causing the monkeys to stand on their hind legs and scan the ground. These calls are not just expressions of fear. They are referential signals, each corresponding to a specific type of threat. Young vervets learn these calls from adults, initially making mistakes but gradually refining their usage as they mature. This learning component suggests that the calls are not entirely innate but are shaped by experience. Prairie dogs, rodents that live in complex burrow systems across North American grasslands, have an even more sophisticated alarm call system. Researcher Kon Slobodchikov has spent decades studying prairie dog vocalizations and has found that their calls encode detailed information about approaching predators. Prairie dogs produce different calls for humans, dogs, coyotes, and hawks. More remarkably, their calls also convey information about the size, shape, and speed of the threat. In controlled experiments, prairie dogs gave different calls when shown humans wearing different colored shirts, and their calls varied depending on whether a person was tall or short, thin or heavy. The calls appear to function almost like sentences, combining elements to describe specific features of the environment. Whether prairie dog calls constitute a true language is debated. They lack the syntactic structure and unlimited recombination that define human language. But they are far more than simple alarms. They transmit information with a level of detail that was unexpected in rodents, and they demonstrate that even small-brained mammals can encode complex information in vocal signals. Dolphins have their own unique communication system centered on signature whistles. As mentioned earlier, each dolphin develops a unique whistle early in life, a sound that functions as a name. Dolphins use these whistles to identify themselves and to call specific individuals. When separated from their pod, dolphins produce their own signature whistles, presumably to announce their location. Other dolphins respond by producing their own whistles, and sometimes by mimicking the whistle of the calling dolphin as if to say, "I hear you." This back-and-forth exchange suggests a level of reciprocal communication that goes beyond simple broadcasting of information. Dolphins also produce a wide range of other sounds, including clicks used for echolocation, burst pulse sounds that seem to convey emotional states, and various whistles and squeaks whose meanings are not yet fully understood. Researchers have documented instances where dolphins appear to coordinate hunting strategies using vocalizations, with different calls preceding different hunting techniques. The precise meanings of these calls remain unclear, but the pattern suggests that dolphins share information about intended actions, not just about immediate threats or opportunities. Humpback whales sing long, complex songs that can last up to 20 minutes and are repeated for hours. All males in a particular population sing the same song in a given breeding season, but the song changes gradually over time, with new phrases added and old ones dropped. The songs also vary between populations, creating regional dialects. Researchers believe the songs serve to attract females and possibly to signal fitness to other males, but the full function remains uncertain. What is clear is that the songs are learned, transmitted culturally from one generation to the next, and modified through a process that resembles cultural evolution. The whales are not simply repeating an innate template. They are participating in a shared vocal tradition that changes in response to social influences. Bees communicate through dance, as we have seen, but they also use chemical signals called pheromones to coordinate activities within the hive. Different pheromones signal alarm, mark trails to food sources, indicate the health of the queen, and regulate the development of larvae. The combination of dance and pheromone creates a multimodal communication system that allows a colony of tens of thousands of individuals to function as a coordinated whole. No single bee understands the entire system, yet the collective behavior that emerges is remarkably efficient. These communication systems vary widely in structure and function, but they share a common feature. They allow animals to share information, coordinate behavior, and maintain social bonds. Language, in the human sense, may be unique to our species, but the impulse to communicate, to bridge the gap between one mind and another, is ancient and widespread. It appears wherever there is a need to cooperate, to warn, or to connect. And as we shall see, the ability to learn from others amplifies the power of communication, creating cultures in the animal world. Part 7. Traditions passed down. Culture, in its broadest sense, refers to behaviors that are learned from others and passed down through generations, creating traditions that distinguish one group from another. For many years, Culture was considered a uniquely human phenomenon, something that arose only with language and symbolic thought. But field researchers studying wild animal populations have documented traditions in numerous species, behaviors that are not explained by genetics or individual learning alone, but rather by social transmission. These traditions meet at least some definitions of culture, even if they lack the complexity and symbolism of human cultural systems. Chimpanzee communities provide some of the clearest examples of animal culture. Different populations of chimpanzees, living in similar environments, use different techniques to obtain food. In the Thai forest of Ivory Coast, chimpanzees crack nuts using stones as hammers and anvils. They select specific stones, transport them to nut-bearing trees, and use precise strikes to open the hard shells. Young chimpanzees learn this skill by watching their mothers, a process that can take years to master. In contrast, chimpanzees in Gom, Tanzania, where similar nuts and stones are available, do not crack nuts at all. The skill has not been transmitted in that population, even though the raw materials and cognitive abilities are present. Other behaviors vary similarly across chimpanzee communities. Some groups fish for termites using slender sticks, carefully selecting and modifying the sticks to the right length and flexibility. Others use leaf sponges to extract water from tree holes, wadding leaves in their mouths to create an absorbent tool. Still others engage in grooming handclasp, a behavior where two individuals hold hands above their heads while grooming each other with the free hand. This behavior is common in some communities but absent in others nearby. The variations cannot be explained by environmental differences alone. They appear to be traditions, maintained through social learning and imitation. Whales also exhibit cultural traditions, particularly in their feeding techniques. Humpback whales in the Gulf of Maine use a method called bubble net feeding, where a group of whales swims in a circle below a school of fish, releasing bubbles that form a cylindrical net. The fish, reluctant to cross the bubble barrier, concentrate in the center, and the whales then surge upward through the middle with mouths open, consuming large quantities of fish in a single gulp. This technique is not used by humpback whales in other regions, even where similar prey is available. It appears to be a local innovation, transmitted socially within the population. Orcas, or killer whales, show even more pronounced cultural variation. Different orca populations, called ecotypes, specialize in different prey and use different hunting techniques. Resident orcas in the Pacific Northwest feed primarily on salmon and use echolocation almost constantly to locate fish. Transient orcas in the same waters feed on marine mammals, including seals and other whales, and hunt in near silence to avoid alerting their prey. The two groups speak different dialects, have different social structures, and do not interbreed despite overlapping ranges. Their behavioral differences are maintained through cultural transmission, with young orcas learning hunting techniques, vocalizations, and social norms from their mothers and other pod members. In some documented cases, researchers have observed the spread of new behaviors through populations, providing real-time evidence of cultural transmission. In the 1950s, a single Japanese macaque named Imo began washing sweet potatoes in a stream before eating them, removing sand and dirt. Other young monkeys in her troop observed and adopted the behavior, and within a decade, potato washing had spread throughout the group. Later, Imo innovated again, this time carrying potatoes to the ocean and washing them in salt water, which may have improved the taste. This behavior also spread. The traditions persisted in the troop for decades, long after Imo herself had died. Dolphins in Shark Bay, Australia, have developed a tool-use tradition. Some dolphins tear off pieces of sponge from the seafloor and wear them over their rostrums, their long snouts, while foraging. The sponges protect their sensitive skin from abrasions as they probe the rocky bottom for fish hiding in crevices. This behavior, called sponging, is passed from mothers to their offspring, predominantly to daughters. Genetic analysis has shown that most spongers are related through maternal lines, and observational studies confirm that young dolphins learn the technique by staying close to their mothers during foraging trips. Sponging is not practiced by all dolphins in Shark Bay, only by specific lineages, making it a clear example of a culturally transmitted skill. These traditions matter because they show that animals do not simply respond to their environments in fixed, genetically determined ways. They learn from each other, they innovate, and they pass those innovations on. Over time, these processes create diversity, not just between species, but within them. Culture allows animals to adapt to local conditions more rapidly than genetic evolution would permit, and it creates a form of inheritance that runs parallel to genetics. What an animal knows is shaped not only by its genes and individual experience, but also by the accumulated knowledge of its group. This knowledge can include where to find food, how to obtain it, whom to trust, and how to communicate. It is a social inheritance, and it shapes behavior across generations. The recognition of culture in animals also raises new questions about how we study intelligence, for culture itself can be a form of collective intelligence distributed across many individuals and many lifetimes. Part 8. The methods behind the discoveries. Understanding animal intelligence requires more than casual observation. It demands careful experimental design, patience, and a willingness to see the world from perspectives very different from our own. The methods scientists use to study animal cognition have evolved considerably over the decades, becoming more sophisticated and more attuned to the natural behaviors of the species under investigation. Each method comes with strengths and limitations, and the best research often combines multiple approaches to build a coherent picture. Controlled laboratory experiments allow researchers to isolate specific variables and test hypotheses with precision. An experimenter can present an animal with a novel problem, such as retrieving food from a transparent box that can only be opened in a particular way, and then observe how the animal approaches the task. By varying the difficulty, the presence of demonstrations from other animals, or the type of reward, researchers can tease apart the cognitive processes involved. Laboratory settings also allow for technologies like touchscreen interfaces, where animals can respond to visual stimuli and receive immediate feedback, making it possible to study abstract concepts like numerosity or categorization. However, laboratory experiments have drawbacks. The artificial environment may not reflect the challenges an animal faces in the wild, and some species do not thrive or behave naturally in captivity. A bird that caches thousands of seeds in a mountainous landscape may not demonstrate its full memory abilities in a small cage. A dolphin in a tank cannot engage in the long-distance acoustic signaling it uses in the open ocean. For these reasons, field studies remain essential. They allow scientists to observe animals in their natural habitats, documenting behaviors that emerge organically in response to real ecological and social pressures. field research comes with its own challenges. Variables cannot be controlled as tightly, and behaviors may occur infrequently or unpredictably. A researcher might spend months observing a group of chimpanzees before witnessing a single instance of tool use or social learning. Weather, terrain, and the animal's wariness of human presence can all complicate data collection. Despite these difficulties, field studies have yielded some of the most important discoveries in animal cognition, revealing behaviors that would never appear in a laboratory because they depend on the complexity of the natural world. Some of the most ingenious research combines field and laboratory approaches. Researchers might identify a behavior in the wild, such as nut cracking in chimpanzees, and then recreate simplified versions of the task in captivity to study the underlying learning mechanisms. Alternatively, they might train captive animals on a task and then release them to see whether the learned behavior persists and spreads in a wild population. These hybrid approaches leverage the strengths of both methods. Non-invasive techniques have also advanced rapidly. Video recording allows researchers to document behaviors in detail and analyze them frame by frame, revealing subtleties that might be missed in real time. Acoustic monitoring, using underwater microphones or sensitive arrays in forests, captures vocalizations across wide areas and over long periods, building databases of animal communication that can be analyzed for patterns. GPS tracking and accelerometers attached to animals provide data on movement, activity levels, and even physiological states without requiring direct observation. Cognitive testing has also become more ethically attuned. Researchers increasingly design experiments that align with an animal's natural behaviors and motivations. Rather than forcing an animal to perform an arbitrary task for a food reward, scientists look for ways to engage the animal's curiosity or social instincts. An octopus might be given a puzzle box not because it must open it to eat, but because opening it is intrinsically interesting to an octopus. A crow might be presented with a tool use challenge because crows naturally manipulate objects. This shift recognizes that animals are more likely to demonstrate their cognitive abilities when the task resonates with their evolved capacities. Statistical methods have also improved. Researchers now use rigorous controls to rule out alternative explanations for observed behaviors. If a dog appears to understand pointing gestures, experimenters test whether the dog is simply following the direction of movement, or responding to scent, or reacting to inadvertent cues from the experimenter. Multiple trials, blind conditions where the experimenter does not know the correct answer, and comparisons across different species help ensure that conclusions are warranted by the data. One ongoing debate in the field concerns the interpretation of results. When an animal succeeds at a task, what exactly has it demonstrated? Consider a rat that learns to press a lever to receive food. The rat has learned an association, but does it understand causation? Does it know that its action produces the food, or does it simply perform a behavior that has been reinforced? These questions are difficult to answer definitively. Researchers often use converging evidence, looking for multiple lines of support for a particular interpretation. If an animal not only learns a task but also generalizes it to new situations, modifies its behavior strategically, and shows flexibility in response to changing conditions, these patterns collectively strengthen the case for a richer form of understanding. The field of animal cognition is also increasingly collaborative. Biologists, psychologists, neuroscientists, and even computer scientists work together, bringing different perspectives and tools to shared questions. Comparative approaches, where the same task is given to many species, help identify which cognitive abilities are widespread and which are specialized. This work is painstaking and slow, built from thousands of small observations and carefully controlled experiments. But gradually, it is revealing a world of animal minds that is more varied and more intricate than we once imagined. As we move forward, we find that intelligence in animals often depends on solving problems that are specific to their ways of life, and this brings us to consider how different environments shape different forms of thinking. Part 9. Intelligence shaped by necessity. Intelligence does not develop in a vacuum. It evolves in response to specific challenges, pressures, and opportunities that animals encounter in their environments. The cognitive abilities that prove useful for a nocturnal predator differ from those needed by a social herbivore, and both differ from the demands placed on a creature that lives in the sea. When we examine animal intelligence, we often find that it is exquisitely tailored to the ecological niche the animal occupies. This specialization means that comparing intelligence across species can be misleading if we use a single standard. A crow may excel at tasks requiring innovation and tool use, while a bat may demonstrate remarkable spatial processing through echolocation. Neither is more intelligent in an absolute sense. They are intelligent in different ways. Bats navigate and hunt using echolocation, emitting high-frequency sounds and interpreting the returning echoes to build a detailed acoustic map of their surroundings. This ability requires sophisticated neural processing. The bat must determine not only the location of objects but also their size, texture, and movement. Some bats can distinguish between different species of insects based solely on the acoustic signature of their wing beats. They hunt in complete darkness, pursuing erratic prey at high speeds, adjusting their calls dozens of times per second to track the target. The cognitive demands of this task are immense, yet bats perform it effortlessly because their brains have evolved to extract meaning from echoes in ways that our brains are not equipped to do. Similarly, electric fish, such as the weakly electric knife fish found in murky South American rivers, generate electric fields around their bodies and sense distortions in these fields caused by nearby objects. This electroreception allows them to navigate, find prey, and communicate in environments where vision is nearly useless. The fish can distinguish between living and non-living objects, identify the species of other fish, and even assess the size and health of potential mates, all through electrical sensing. The neural circuits required to process this information represent a form of intelligence that is entirely alien to us, yet it is finely tuned to the fish's world. Arctic foxes demonstrate spatial problem-solving adapted to their environment. These animals cache food extensively during times of abundance, burying prey items across wide areas of tundra. In winter, when the landscape is covered in snow and visual landmarks are obscured, the foxes relocate their caches with precision. Research suggests they use a combination of spatial memory, olfactory cues, and possibly even magnetic field detection to navigate. The foxes must remember hundreds of cache locations and prioritize retrieval based on factors like perishability and nutritional value. This memory system is specialized for the fox's nomadic lifestyle and the unpredictable food availability of the Arctic. Cuttlefish, relatives of the octopus, are masters of camouflage. They can change the color, pattern and texture of their skin in less than a second, matching complex backgrounds with remarkable accuracy. This ability requires the cuttlefish to visually assess its surroundings, select an appropriate camouflage pattern from its repertoire, and coordinate the activity of millions of specialized skin cells called chromatophores. Interestingly, cuttlefish are colorblind. They see the world in shades of gray, yet they can match colored backgrounds. Researchers believe they achieve this by analyzing the brightness and texture of the substrate and using polarization vision to detect contrasts invisible to us. The cognitive processing underlying this feat is highly specialized, solving a problem critical to the cuttlefish's survival in a world full of predators. Honeybees, despite their tiny brains, demonstrate cognitive flexibility in foraging. They learn to associate specific colors, shapes, and scents with nectar rewards, and they can be trained to perform surprisingly abstract tasks. In experiments, bees have learned concepts like same and different, choosing matching stimuli over non-matching ones to receive sugar water. They can also learn to navigate mazes, remember landmarks, and optimize foraging routes to visit flowers in the most efficient sequence, a problem analogous to the traveling salesman problem in computer science. Bees solve this problem through trial and error and memory, gradually improving their routes over successive trips. The fact that such a small brain can handle these tasks suggests that intelligence, at a certain level, does not require vast numbers of neurons. What matters is the organization of those neurons and the algorithms they implement. Archerfish, found in the mangrove swamps of Southeast Asia and Australia, hunt insects by shooting them down with jets of water. The fish must account for the refraction of light at the water's surface, which makes the insect appear to be in a different location than it actually is. Somehow, archerfish compensate for this optical distortion, adjusting the angle and force of their water jets to hit the target accurately. Young archerfish learn to do this through practice, initially missing frequently but gradually improving with experience. The fish also learn to predict where an insect will fall after being hit, positioning themselves to catch it before other fish can steal it. This predictive ability requires an understanding of projectile motion and trajectory, concepts we might assume would require higher cognition. Yet archerfish, with relatively simple brains, master these physics intuitively. These examples illustrate a broader principle. Intelligence is not a ladder, with humans at the top and other species arranged below us in descending order. It is more like a landscape, with different peaks representing different forms of cognitive specialization. Each species has evolved the mental tools it needs to survive and reproduce in its particular niche. Some of these tools are general-purpose problem-solving abilities, useful across many contexts. Others are highly specialized, effective for specific tasks but not easily transferred to other domains. When we study animal intelligence, we are mapping this landscape, discovering the diverse ways that minds can be organized and the varied problems they can solve. And as we continue this mapping, we encounter questions about consciousness itself, about whether animals not only think but also experience their thoughts. Part 10. The question of awareness. Consciousness is perhaps the most difficult aspect of animal minds to study. We cannot directly observe another creature's subjective experience, nor can we ask them to describe it. We can only infer the presence of consciousness from behavior, brain structure, and evolutionary continuity. The question of whether animals are conscious, and to what degree, has occupied philosophers and scientists for centuries. In recent years, the consensus has shifted. Most researchers now accept that at least some animals possess some form of conscious experience, though the nature and richness of that experience remain open questions. One framework for thinking about consciousness distinguishes between different levels or kinds. Sentience, the capacity to have subjective experiences such as pain or pleasure, is widely attributed to vertebrates and likely to many invertebrates. Animals with nervous systems respond to harmful stimuli in ways that suggest they experience something akin to suffering, not merely reflex reactions. Fish, for instance, have been shown to learn to avoid locations where they have been injured, to reduce feeding after painful events, and to seek out pain relief when available. These behaviors are consistent with the fish experiencing pain as an aversive conscious state, not just as a signal that triggers avoidance. Cephalopods, including octopuses, squid, and cuttlefish, are also strong candidates for sentience. They have complex brains, demonstrate learning and memory, and show behavioral responses to injury that resemble pain responses in vertebrates. Some countries, including the United Kingdom, have legally recognized cephalopods as sentient beings, granting them protections under animal welfare laws. This recognition reflects the growing scientific evidence that these invertebrates possess subjective experiences, even though their nervous systems are organized very differently from ours. A higher level of consciousness involves self-awareness, the recognition of oneself as a distinct entity. As discussed earlier, some animals pass the mirror test, suggesting they have at least a visual self-concept. But self-awareness may extend beyond mirror recognition. Animals that plan for the future, as scrub jays and chimpanzees do, must in some sense distinguish between their current state and their anticipated future state. This requires a concept of self that persists through time. Similarly, animals that demonstrate metacognition, monitoring their own knowledge and uncertainty, are engaging with their own mental states. They are aware at some level of what they know and what they do not know. Phenomenal consciousness, the subjective quality of experience, is harder to assess. When a bat echolocates, what is it like to be that bat? The philosopher Thomas Nagel famously argued that we can never truly know because our sensory and cognitive apparatus is too different. Yet the question remains important. If animals have rich subjective experiences, if they feel joy, fear, boredom, and curiosity in ways that matter to them, then this has implications for how we treat them. The ethical weight of these considerations has driven much of the recent interest in animal consciousness. Some researchers have looked for neural correlates of consciousness, brain structures and processes that are associated with conscious experience in humans. The cerebral cortex, particularly the prefrontal cortex, has long been thought essential for higher-order consciousness. But birds lack a cerebral cortex, yet they demonstrate cognitive abilities comparable to mammals. This suggests that consciousness does not require a cortex specifically, but rather certain kinds of neural organization. Birds have a structure called the pallium, which performs functions analogous to the mammalian cortex. The brains of birds and mammals arrived at similar solutions through different evolutionary paths, a phenomenon called convergent evolution. Octopuses present an even more striking case. Their neurons are distributed throughout their arms, and their central brain is organized in a fundamentally different way from vertebrate brains. Yet octopuses learn, remember, solve problems, and show individual personalities. Some octopuses are bold and exploratory, others cautious. Some are playful, manipulating objects with no apparent goal other than curiosity. These behavioral differences suggest something like a subjective perspective, a sense of individuality that goes beyond simple stimulus-response mechanisms. Recent work has also explored the possibility of consciousness in animals with very simple nervous systems. Bees, as noted, can learn abstract concepts and make complex decisions. Do they have subjective experiences, or are they biological automatons, responding to stimuli without any inner life? The question is difficult to answer. Some researchers argue that any system capable of integrating information from multiple senses, forming memories, and making flexible decisions likely has at least a rudimentary form of consciousness. Others maintain that consciousness requires specific neural architectures that invertebrates may lack. The debate continues, and it may not be resolvable with current methods. What is clear is that consciousness, like intelligence, is not a binary property. It exists in degrees and varieties. A fish may be conscious of pain without being self-aware. A crow may have a visual self-concept without the kind of autobiographical memory that humans possess. An octopus may experience curiosity and problem-solving satisfaction without anything resembling human-like reflection on its own thoughts. Each species likely inhabits a different kind of subjective world, shaped by its senses, its cognitive abilities, and its evolutionary history. The study of animal consciousness is not just an academic exercise. It touches on fundamental questions about the nature of mind, the distribution of experience in the living world, and our responsibilities toward other creatures. As we recognize the depth and diversity of animal minds, we are also called to reconsider our relationship with them, a theme that will guide our closing reflections. Part 11. What the science means for us. The discoveries we have explored carry implications that extend beyond the laboratory and the field site. When we learn that crows remember faces, that elephants mourn their dead, that octopuses plan ahead, and that bees make collective decisions, we are not simply adding facts to our store of knowledge. We are being invited to reconsider our place in the world and our relationship with the other minds that share it. This reconsideration does not lead to easy answers, but it does open space for deeper questions. For much of Western history, influenced by philosophical traditions that placed humans at the center of moral concern, animals were viewed primarily as resources or as part of the backdrop against which human life unfolds. Descartes, the 17th century philosopher, famously argued that animals were mere machines, incapable of thought or feeling. Their cries, he suggested, were no different from the creaking of a mechanism. This view justified using animals without concern for their welfare, as one might use any tool. But as evidence of animal cognition and emotion has accumulated, this mechanistic perspective has become untenable for most scientists and many philosophers. If animals can suffer, if they can remember and anticipate, if they form bonds and grieve losses, then our actions toward them carry moral weight. This does not necessarily mean that all uses of animals are wrong, but it does mean that we cannot dismiss their experiences as irrelevant. A pig that can solve complex problems and recognize the emotional states of others is not simply a commodity. A dolphin that remembers individuals for decades and communicates through learned vocalizations is not just an attraction. These creatures have lives that matter to them, perspectives from which the world appears in particular ways. Recognizing this does not solve ethical dilemmas, but it changes the terms in which we approach them. Conservation efforts, too, are influenced by our understanding of animal minds. When we know that elephants have long memories and complex social structures, the disruption caused by poaching extends beyond the loss of individual lives. It breaks family units, traumatizes survivors, and erodes the accumulated knowledge that matriarchs carry. When we learn that orca populations have distinct cultures, the extinction of a particular group means not just the loss of genetic diversity but the loss of unique traditions, hunting techniques, and vocalizations that have been passed down for generations. Protecting animals becomes not only a matter of preserving species but also of preserving the cultures and knowledge systems that exist within those species. Our relationship with domestic animals also shifts in light of these findings. Dogs have evolved alongside humans for thousands of years, developing cognitive specializations that allow them to understand us in ways that even our closest primate relatives do not. This partnership is built on mutual understanding and emotional connection. Recognizing the depth of dogs' emotional lives, their capacity for attachment and distress, reinforces the responsibilities we bear toward them. They are not accessories or possessions. They are beings with their own needs, preferences, and vulnerabilities. The same applies to cats, horses, and other animals we have brought into our homes and farms. The study of animal intelligence also challenges our tendency toward anthropocentrism, the habit of measuring all things by human standards. When we ask whether animals are intelligent, we often mean, are they intelligent like us? But this question assumes that human intelligence is the gold standard, the form toward which all other minds should be compared. The evidence suggests otherwise. Intelligence takes many forms, each adapted to different challenges and opportunities. A bee's ability to navigate using polarized light and to communicate through dance is no less remarkable than a human's ability to write a poem. They are different, certainly, but difference does not imply inferiority. In recognizing the diverse forms of animal intelligence, we are also recognizing the limits of our own perspective. We are one species among many, one kind of mind in a world full of minds. This recognition can be humbling, but it can also be enriching. The world becomes a more interesting place when we acknowledge the hidden depths around us. A walk through a forest is different when we know that the crows overhead may be watching us, remembering our faces, perhaps discussing us in their own way. A visit to the ocean takes on new meaning when we consider the intelligence of the creatures beneath the surface, the dolphins navigating by sound, the octopuses solving problems with minds utterly unlike our own. These are not mere objects or scenery. They are subjects experiencing the world from their own vantage points. At the same time, acknowledging animal intelligence does not require us to romanticize animals or to deny the real differences between human and non-human minds. Humans have capacities that, as far as we know, no other species possesses. Our language allows for unlimited recombination of ideas. Our ability to create and transmit complex cultural knowledge across generations has given rise to science, art, technology, and institutions. We can reflect on our own thoughts, imagine distant futures, and grapple with abstract moral principles. These capacities are significant, and they shape our responsibilities. But they do not erase the value or the reality of other forms of cognition and experience. The science of animal intelligence invites us to live with greater attentiveness, to notice what we might otherwise overlook, and to extend our circle of moral consideration more thoughtfully. It does not provide a simple formula for how to act, but it offers a richer picture of the world, one in which many kinds of minds navigate many kinds of challenges, each in their own way. And perhaps that is enough. Let us close with a final reflection on where this knowledge leaves us. Part 12. Mysteries that Remain. We have traveled through a landscape of animal minds, encountering abilities that surprise, challenge, and sometimes humble us. We have seen bees vote, crows remember, elephants mourn, octopuses plan, pigs empathize, and parrots comprehend. We have explored the methods scientists use to uncover these abilities, the ways intelligence is shaped by ecology, and the difficult questions surrounding consciousness and subjective experience. Yet for all that we have learned, vast territories remain unmapped. The science of animal cognition is still young, and many of the most profound questions remain unanswered. We do not fully understand how cognition arises from neural activity in humans or in other animals. We know which brain regions are involved in memory, decision-making, and emotion, but we do not know how patterns of electrical and chemical signals give rise to thoughts, feelings, and subjective experiences. This explanatory gap, the hard problem of consciousness, applies as much to animals as it does to ourselves. We can observe that an octopus learns and solves problems, but we cannot say with certainty what it is like to be an octopus, to experience the world through 8 semi-autonomous arms, to perceive color while being colorblind, to live a solitary life punctuated by brief encounters. Similarly, we do not know the full extent of communication in many species. Dolphins produce an astonishing variety of sounds, and we have decoded only a small fraction of their possible meanings. Do they have names for objects, verbs for actions, a way to refer to past events or future intentions? We do not know. The same applies to whales, whose songs may encode information we have not yet learned to interpret, and to elephants, whose low-frequency rumbles travel for kilometers and may convey messages we cannot hear without specialized equipment. Even among primates, our closest relatives, much of their communication remains opaque to us. The question of how widespread consciousness is in the animal kingdom also remains unresolved. We have reasonable confidence that mammals and birds experience at least basic forms of sentience, and growing evidence suggests the same for cephalopods and possibly some other invertebrates. But what about fish, reptiles, amphibians? What about insects beyond bees? At what point in the complexity of nervous systems does subjective experience emerge, if indeed it emerges at a single point rather than gradually? These questions may not have definitive answers, but they are worth asking, because they shape how we interact with the living world. We also know very little about the cognitive lives of many species simply because they have not been studied. Most research focuses on a relatively small number of animals: primates, corvids, parrots, cetaceans, elephants, dogs, and a few others. These are charismatic species, often large, often social, often relatively easy to observe or work with in captivity. But the animal kingdom encompasses millions of species, most of which have never been the subject of cognitive research. What might we discover if we looked more closely at the minds of reptiles, amphibians, or the countless species of fish and invertebrates? Some may possess abilities we have not imagined. Others may challenge our definitions of intelligence or consciousness in unexpected ways. Even within well-studied species, individual variation is often underappreciated. Not all chimpanzees use tools in the same way. Not all dolphins display the same level of innovation. Not all crows solve problems with equal success. Animals, like humans, vary in their abilities, personalities, and preferences. This variation means that generalizations about a species can obscure important differences between individuals. It also raises questions about the factors that contribute to cognitive development in animals. Do some individuals learn more because they are exposed to better teachers, or because they have more opportunities to practice, or because they inherit certain genetic predispositions? These questions parallel those we ask about human development, and the answers are likely to be similarly complex. The science also faces practical and ethical challenges. Studying wild animals requires funding, time, and access to habitats that are increasingly threatened by human activity. Many of the species we most want to understand are endangered, and invasive research methods are often ruled out on ethical grounds. Captive studies offer more control, but they raise concerns about animal welfare and whether behaviors observed in captivity reflect natural capacities. Balancing the pursuit of knowledge with the welfare of the animals being studied is an ongoing challenge, one that requires thoughtful consideration and continual refinement of methods. Despite these uncertainties and challenges, the trajectory of the field is clear. Each year brings new discoveries, new techniques, and new insights. Our picture of animal minds grows richer and more nuanced. What once seemed impossible, communicating with bees through robotic dances or documenting cultural traditions in whales, is now routine. What once seemed certain, that animals live entirely in the present or that only humans use tools, has been revised in light of evidence. This is how science progresses, through accumulation of careful observations, rigorous testing, and willingness to revise old assumptions when new data warrant it. As we close, it is worth reflecting on the journey we have taken. We began by questioning what we thought we knew about animal intelligence, and we have seen that the answer is both more complicated and more wondrous than we might have expected. Animals are not lesser versions of humans. They are their own kinds of beings with their own kinds of intelligence, adapted to their own kinds of lives. Some of their abilities exceed ours. Some are entirely different, solving problems we never face. All of them remind us that mind is a broad category, encompassing more variety than we can easily grasp. The hidden science of animal intelligence reveals a world that is alive with thought, feeling, and meaning. It is a world we share, though we often forget it. The creatures around us are not simply moving through instinct and reflex. They are navigating, deciding, remembering, communicating, and in many cases, experiencing their lives in ways that matter to them. Recognizing this does not answer all our questions, but it opens us to a fuller, more generous understanding of life on Earth. And that understanding, quiet and patient as it is, might just change the way we see the world and our place in it from here forward.